The truth about ulcers. Those stories tonight, September 9th, 1994, after this brief message.
Oh, very well. Even though people knew she had strong opinions of her own, she kept them to herself. But circumstances have changed. Barbara Bush is now free to say what she thinks, and she does just that in her new book titled Barbara Bush, a Memoir. Before our own Barbara went on assignment, she completed this very candid interview with the former First Lady, the first that Mrs. Bush has done since leaving the White House. Their conversation in Maine covered a lot of territory, some of it untouched until now.
The official Bush residence, the voting address, is a new house in Houston, but the family's roots lie along this coast. George Bush's maternal grandfather established this peaceful refuge on a spit of land named for him, Walker's Point, at the turn of the century. This is where George and Barbara Bush still spend their summers.
But George's grandmother planted those, and I have moved them from where she had them and put them over here.
Walker's Point is a magnet for the Bush grandchildren, 13 of them, and a haven for the adults.
Right, you know what everybody says about grandchildren. They're great, but you can send them home.
Barbara Bush may joke about her grandchildren, but she clearly dotes on them here. Children, in fact, have been a priority for Barbara Bush throughout her life. She writes about them passionately. Again and again in the book, you write that if you're going to have children, you must put the children first.
I believe that very strongly.
Okay, today we have women who want to have careers and children.
That's good.
Or women who must work and have children.
That's good. I believe in all those things. All I say is, if you opt to have children, first of all, I don't think you need to be married to be happy in life. And I don't think you have to have children to be happy in life. But if you opt to have children, I feel very strongly that they should be your top priority.
The children before the career.
That's right.
When we talk about children, in 1953, your 3-year-old daughter, Robin, died from leukemia. Do you ever get over that?
No. And that's okay, too. But it's true that she is a happy part of our life now. Trouble is that you don't get over it. It's very hard to talk about her. But
I know, even now, after all these years.
But it makes everybody more valuable. George Bush and I love every single living human more because of Robin. That's a nice gift to give to people. And we should talk about something else, I guess, for a minute.
Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about another time that was difficult. When you came back from China, where George Bush served really as an ambassador, when you came back, you went into a terrible depression.
I was ashamed, and I was certainly ignorant about depression. And I was so dumb, I didn't ask for help. And George was the only one who knew I had it, and he would say, why don't you get some help?
You even write that you had thoughts of suicide.
Well, not quite, but I had
thought of driving into a tree.
Yes.
Well, that's pretty serious business.
It was pretty serious, and I didn't like it one bit. And I did think of that, and I would pull the car off to the stop at the side of the road and just stop. And you know, I didn't even tell my best friend. I didn't tell anybody. And I'm not very proud of that now, but it's over.
It just lifted?
It lifted, but remember, it was the first time I had, in maybe 5 or 6 years, George had a job I really couldn't share. I was at the right age. I was 51, which is probably physically the right age to go into depression. And my children were all away for the first time.
Did it ever return?
No, never. And I think it also, I'm beginning to sound like Pollyanna, I think it was a good thing to happen, because now when I hear about depression, instead of saying, oh, pull yourself together, which is what I used to think, I now think, well, that's tough, and you got to get help.
Mrs. Bush, probably the most controversial question that was asked of you.
Let's guess.
Okay, let's guess.
Abortion.
Abortion. Okay.
Which followed us through our whole political life. But you know what people don't take into consideration, I think, is how much we agree on it. I mean, we both agree that abortion is all right in the case of rape, incest, and the life of the mother. I don't feel I can be judgmental with others. With George, it's really against his religion to have an abortion.
You never gave your opinion as long as you were the vice president's
right.
wife or the president's wife.
That's right.
In your book, for the first time, you do give your opinion.
Well,
And you are pro-choice.
I think that's right. And that comes as no surprise to George Bush.
But it does perhaps come as a surprise, or certainly
Oh, I
the
don't
first time
think
you've
so.
said it publicly. It may not be a surprise, but you've never said it publicly.
Well,
Do you think that the issue of abortion should be part of the Republican platform?
no. Well, first of all, I don't, I've never gone by the platforms, and no, I don't. I think they ought to keep to big, broad issues. And I think the same should be held for the Democrats.
But to make it clear, you are pro-choice.
Yes.
You know, there are people who feel that your husband was also pro-choice and then changed.
I'm glad you asked that question, because George Bush was, and still is, an enormous backer of family planning. And the moment family planning got into the abortion business, he stepped out. He never was pro-choice. He was always anti-abortion. For him, it's killing.
Let's talk about something that was extremely controversial when your husband was running for president, and that is, should you have dyed your hair? Do you remember all that business?
Early,
Did
yes.
you ever think you should have?
Well, you know, I did dye my hair from 29 to 39 or something.
Were you blonde?
Well, I went green, orange, and I stopped sort of in between jobs, Congress and the United Nations, and life has been 100% happier.
You said it yourself in the book when somebody said, "Why are you so popular?"
Mrs. Raisa Gorbachev
Yeah.
asked me that.
And you said?
I said, because I'm fat and old and nobody feels threatened by me. I think that's true. I mean, I think you can sort of relax.
I just glanced down at my questions, and as I did, I realized you're wearing two different color sneakers. I hope that the camera, one of our cameras, can see.
I'd be glad to hold them up above my head.
Is this some sort of oddity of yours?
You think that's odd?
Well,
Do you?
Do you always wear two different color sneakers?
Well, I have to, because I have no two alike in Kennebunkport, Maine, or Houston, Texas.
Well, it may start a new trend, I must say. Barbara Bush's autobiography is deliberately upbeat, touching on mostly happy times with family and friends. Mrs. Bush claims she loved her time in the White House, that she could hardly wait to wake up every morning. But there were some dark dawns and some significant controversies. Her most difficult time, she says, was just before the Gulf War began. You write about knowing of the day that the war was going to begin. You knew 12 hours in advance.
I hated that.
How did you feel? Do you remember those feelings?
I remember it very well. I just remember hating it, wishing I could just go to sleep and stay there till it was all over. That's the way I felt. I don't know how George Bush stood it, but I just, I couldn't talk to anyone that day because I can't keep a secret. I was so afraid I was going to slip out, and so many lives would be endangered. And then Billy Graham came and spent the night with us, and I knew it was going to happen, and I just hated that, but I didn't tell him. We watched the news together.
And that's the first time he knew, and that came out. During your husband's presidency, he nominated Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court. You write that he's an extraordinary man.
He is.
And that you didn't really believe Anita Hill.
I don't.
Why?
Well, I don't for a lot of reasons, but I cannot believe that a young woman graduate from the Yale Law School in 1980 would put up with harassment, would follow a man from job to job, and call him every time she came to town, all of which she did and said she did. I find that inconceivable.
Why do you think she made those statements?
I have no idea. But if I have to choose between one or the other, I'll certainly choose Clarence Thomas. Now, having said that, do I think harassment is right? Absolutely not. I think it's terrible, and I think women should speak up the moment something happens like that. But I would hope they'd speak up only if it happened. And I think, actually, in many cases, you can just say, stop it. I mean, I don't think you have to quit your job. I think you could just say stop it, and it would stop.
How do you feel about the role of the Christian right today?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I feel very strongly about it. I do not think Christian's a bad word, and I do not think right, meaning conservative, is a bad word. But I don't think they go together when they're
What would you call it? How would you
they're
describe
saying
these
radical
people?
right now. Now, radical right is wrong. Radical left is wrong. But Christian conservatives are wonderful, as far as I'm concerned.
What is your view of Ross Perot?
I think Ross Perot probably can take credit for the election.
Yes, why?
Well, because I think he took votes from George. But, having said that, that's the name of the game, I guess. Don't ever cry over spilt milk.
You never did?
Why? Why waste your life?
Well, you know, you are one of the few first ladies in recent times, I shouldn't speak of the others, but who seems to have come out of this with, at least superficially, no bitterness, no regrets, no anger, no what might have been.
No. I had pain at the time, but I don't have any pain now. I don't wake up and say, oh, I don't feel that way. I feel like we are the luckiest living humans, and I think George Bush feels that way.
No anger
Did he
at what
want to
happened
be?
Yeah.
No. But did he want to be president? Absolutely. But, I mean, the times were against us.
Dan Quayle, in his autobiography, wrote of your husband's election campaign, and I quote, "This was the most poorly planned and executed incumbent presidential campaign this century." What do you say?
Well, I love Dan Quayle, and he's running for president, I think. I'm not. So I would say I think he's wrong, but that's what he thinks. That's fine.
Mm-hmm. He blames Jim Baker, your husband's chief of staff and then Secretary of State, in great part for the mess-up in the campaign.
Well, I like George Bush's blame better. He says, I look all around for somebody to blame and can only blame myself.
6 months before Election Day, you wrote in your diary, "I do not know whether George Bush will survive this political year, but I know that he is the only stable person running." Bill Clinton
Well, I feel that
stable?
way. I didn't say that. I just said I felt that way at the time. Probably feel that way right now, but I think George Bush was the best qualified person to run for president.
Stable was the word you used.
Well, so I used that. Maybe I had a weak moment that morning, but I felt that way.
Of Al Gore, you write, "He is a liberal and a demagogue." A demagogue?
I also said some pretty nice things
but
about
a
him, too.
demagogue?
I thought he was.
You still think he is?
Well, sort of. Mm-hmm.
What's a demagogue?
Well, I think it's a person who sort of, I'm not quite sure what I think a demagogue is. It covered what I thought it was at the time. I must say, having said that, I think he's been an extraordinarily loyal, good vice president. Do I agree with him? No. But I think he's done an awfully good job of being a good vice president.
You feel that the newspapers and the broadcasters were against your husband during the campaign.
Well, every poll showed they were.
The same thing Bill Clinton complains about today.
I love it when he whines. One thing George Bush never did was that. But all polls show 80% of the press was for Bill Clinton.
While we're talking about Bill Clinton, let me ask you about Hillary Clinton. You said, "I'm not too sure that the American public likes a spouse to be front and center." You compare Hillary Clinton to her husband, and you write, "Hillary Clinton seems much the stronger of the two." And you ask, does it make him weaker, in your opinion? Does it make him weaker?
I don't know. I asked that question.
Well,
I didn't answer it.
Why not answer?
I don't know it. I really don't know the answer.
Do you feel, perhaps, that Mrs. Clinton is, too, as you describe it, front and center?
I don't think so, if that's the way she wants to play the role out.
You write of Margaret Thatcher's husband, Dennis, that he plays it just right. You say supportive, but a life of his own. He never participated in any of her work. Is that how a spouse should be?
Well, it certainly worked well for them, I'll say that.
Public service brings with it public scrutiny and sometimes unwelcome speculation. One of the most painful episodes for Mrs. Bush involved rumors that her husband was romantically involved with a government associate, Jennifer Fitzgerald. You write about widespread rumors, at least among the press, of a romantic relationship between your husband and someone who was supposedly his longtime aide.
Well, she was.
She was, okay. And you know...
And she's a wonderful lady. And can you imagine how hurtful that was to her?
I want to hear about it from you, Mrs. Bush. You say, how do you defend against that which isn't, wasn't,
well, how
and never
do you?
will be? Well,
how do you? I don't know, but it just is the ugliness of politics.
what did the president say to you at the time?
Well, what would he have to say? I mean, I knew it wasn't true, and he knew it wasn't true, so we didn't even have to worry about that.
Do you think if a politician has had affairs, that should stand against him?
It's not my business. I'm not going to get into all
Well,
that.
then do you think, well, this is what I'm saying.
When
do you
you're
think
married,
that the public
it's
has a right
different,
to...
Jerry. When you've taken a commitment, I'm not sure that's just right. No, I would like my politician to keep the commitment to his wife and family. I mean, why should I lie to you about that? I feel that way.
Tell me about election night.
Well, it was pretty bad. No, it wasn't bad that George and I cried, or it was just disappointing. It was very disappointing. But it wasn't, we didn't blame anyone, but it hurt. But it doesn't do any good to dwell on those things. There was so much, as George will tell you, I moved that night in my mind, said, okay, we got to get on with other things, and there were a lot of pluses.
I'd like to close this interview by having you repeat what is in your book when you talk about how you can like what you do,
or you can dislike it. I choose to like it.
all your life.
Well, I learned that. I'd like to say it was all my life, but I learned that.
You can like what you do, or you can dislike it.
I choose to like it.
Thank you, Mrs. Bush.
Thank you.
That interview is very revealing. But there must be a sense of relief at being out of the political maelstrom. As for George Bush, he is reported to be writing a book of his own, which is apparently coming together more slowly than his wife's. He, too, is content to be out of politics, according to Mrs. Bush. But two of their sons are now on the political hustings. Jeb Bush, running for governor of Florida, and young George Bush for governor of Texas. Politics, it would seem, is in the blood. Well, next, the doctor who put spice back into the lives of millions of people with ulcers. He discovered not just a treatment, but a cure. Dr. Timothy Johnson with the amazing medical breakthrough that almost didn't make it. After this.
In the years to come, thousands of people will be protected because of a significant innovation from Volvo. Volvo introduces the world's first side impact airbag. Drive safely.
This is a commercial for cheese. Time for a snack. There's some cheese in the fridge. Throw some cheese on your fruits and muffins.
You don't get over it. It's very hard to talk about it, but...
I know, even now, after all these years.
But it makes everybody more valuable. George Bush and I love every single living human more because of Robin. That's a nice gift to give to people. And we should talk about something else, I guess, for now.
Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about another time that was difficult. When you came back from China, where George Bush served really as an ambassador, when you came back, you went into a terrible depression.
I was ashamed, and I was certainly ignorant.
The truth about ulcers. Those stories tonight, September 9th, 1994, after this brief message.
Oh, very well. Even though people knew she had strong opinions of her own, she kept them to herself. But circumstances have changed. And Barbara Bush is now free to say what she thinks, and she does just that in her new book titled Barbara Bush, a Memoir. Before our own Barbara went on assignment, she completed this very candid interview with the former First Lady, the first that Mrs. Bush has done since leaving the White House. Their conversation in Maine covered a lot of territory, some of it untouched until now.
The official Bush residence, the voting address, is a new house in Houston, but the family's roots lie along this coast. George Bush's maternal grandfather established this peaceful refuge on a spit of land named for him, Walker's Point, at the turn of the century. This is where George and Barbara Bush still spend their summers.
Now, but George's grandmother planted those, and I have moved them from where she had them and put them over here.
Walker's Point is a magnet for the Bush grandchildren, 13 of them, and a haven for the adults.
Right. You know whatever to be married, to be happy in life. And I don't think you have to have children to be happy in life. But if you opt to have children, I feel very strongly that they should be your top priority.
The children before the career.
That's right.
When we talk about children, in 1953, your 3-year-old daughter, Robin, died from leukemia. Do you ever get over that?
No. And that's okay, too. But it's true that she is a happy part of our life now. Trouble is that, Buddy says about grandchildren, they're great, but you can send them home.
Barbara Bush may joke about her grandchildren, but she clearly dotes on them here. Children, in fact, have been a priority for Barbara Bush throughout her life. She writes about them passionately.
Again and again in the book, you write that if you're going to have children, you must put the children first.
I believe that very strongly.
Okay, today we have women who want to have careers and children.
That's good.
Or women who must work and have children.
That's good. I believe in all those things. All I say is, if you opt to have children, first of all, I don't think you need